Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank Lehman College and the dean, the faculty, and especially Nicole Madonna Rosario for inviting me to this auspicious event and this Take Back the Night project, which I am proud to be a participant of. As it was said, my name is Ralph R. Castro, and it is truly an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. I count it as a blessing to have this space and time to be with you, and to give voice to my story, which has never been told in public, and I wish to share with you tonight. I am a survivor. I am a survivor of violence in the form of child sexual abuse and physical abuse, but I am not alone. My mother had me at 15, already an alcoholic, and on the way to becoming a heroin addict. It was these addictions that forced her to kind of be on her own and constantly leave us alone. I have two other siblings, a sister who's 2 years younger than myself, and I, as a child, helped to get her ready for school. Several years later, my brother was born, but he was taken away from us due to a drug debt that my mother had. He was legally taken away from us. My search for him to this day it has been to no avail. But I feel in my heart that he was kind of saved from the cycle of violence. So I'm hopeful that I will find him eventually. Because of abandonment, neglect, and eventually the foster care system, my titi took us in and took legal custody of my sister and me. As it was said earlier, we were products of the welfare system, first as a means for my mother to support a habit, and later because my grandmother or my titi needed to feed us. Although my mother didn't have actual custody of us at the time, my grandmother allowed her, I'm going to use titi as my grandmother, allowed her to actually stay with us. And that entailed nightly encounters of violence, coupled with physical violence. One year in the early 70s, my mother's sister, her husband, and her 3 children, one being his biological child or daughter, were evicted. And they all moved in with Titi, my daughter, my sister, and myself into a 1-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx. It was in this cramped, dysfunctional environment that I was abused by this uncle by marriage. It all began when I was 9 years old, and I was awakened early in the hours of the morning and taken into a bathroom, escorted into a bathroom. He attempted to get me to enter him as I stood behind this grown, naked man. When that failed, undoubtedly because of physics, he molested me. And after he molested me, he led me back to bed. He threatened me with violence, which I hear is a common theme, and kept me quiet also by buying toys for me and taking me out to places and giving me attention. A few years later, after they had all already moved to another apartment, this same aunt came home early from work, and lo and behold, she caught her husband with his stepdaughter in a towel molesting her. She divorced him, kicked him out, and yet he managed to stay around the family. My titi we had eventually moved into a larger apartment, and she took him in. And this always boggles my mind. I understand that she did it as a good deed, but she allowed him to sleep in my room, in my little bed, behind closed doors. Now, she didn't know that this was going on, but yet my aunt knew that something had happened to her daughter. So it was in this room, behind these closed doors, that the worst abuse happened to me. And this is what really gets my blood boiling, that this abuse is preventable. This could have been prevented. And I don't like to blame my family. I'm struggling with that today. But I always question myself, and I've always asked them, why? How could this have happened? And up to that point, he had not penetrated me, and yet he had molested me. But that abuse could have been prevented. I wish that someone at that time had educated my family about abuse and where it began. I don't, as I said, wish to blame my family, but the question lingers. How is this possible? Why was this even allowed? Didn't you know? I recently managed to ask my aunt, after years of therapy, how this person, after being caught red-handed, managed to stay out of jail and around the family. She merely said she thought he only abused girls, and it wasn't our fault. That's what she said to me. It wasn't her fault. It was not my fault. I was a child. The impact abuse has on people goes beyond the physical touching. It is an act of stealing power. It borders soul snatching. When you are sexualized, power is taken away from you, and you learn that love equals sex and power equals violence. How do I get my power back? And what are the consequences that come with regaining that power? Well, you practice what you are taught. I went from being a studious and polite, college-bound kid, reading 12th grade in elementary school, to a dark, troubled child acting out, and constantly fighting because of the trauma. I was subjected to a battery of tests, including psychiatric evaluation, and yet I never openly spoke of the sexual abuse until I was in my mid-40s. I joined a gang seeking, believe it or not, affection and attention. I eventually had to drop out of high school because my titi could no longer take the violence. The constant screaming, the constant violence coming in late at night, the radio being blaring at 3 in the morning. She just had enough, and she had to leave us. That was, despite all my trauma and hardship, the hardest day of my life. I lived in the street for a while. Subsequently, I became addicted to cocaine first, then crack cocaine. I was a crackhead. I began stealing to support my habit and my addiction. I behaved in risky, life-threatening behaviors, both physically and sexually. I became promiscuous and careless. I didn't care anymore. Eventually, I contemplated suicide. I regretfully perpetrated violence to the girlfriends who were trying to help me, and those that I managed to live with, as well as anyone who had the misfortune of encountering my rage. I was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and several petty larceny charges, and I did time upstate. I did years of probation and community service. It was in an attempt at personal transformation approximately 5 years ago that I began down the lifelong path of healing. It was suggested that I write a poem or write poetry about my trauma as a way to release some of the tensions that I was holding within. I would like to share my first poem with you. It's called Darkness Consumes the Light. Out of a blissful, deep slumber, I am stirred. Visions of toys and childish things now blurred. Through wispy, sleepy, innocent eyes, I see a grown, naked man standing in front of me. As I wipe hours of caked sleep, now mingled with warm tears. Warm tears once dry, I start to question why. A childhood erased in a blink of an eye, why? Questions as I feel despair begin to arise, why? Is this a dream? But my eyes don't lie. And still I ponder, why? Just call out, my soul shouts in vain. Open your mouth and tell of this thing. The harder I try, much to my chagrin, the voice stays silent within. You want me to do what? As if in a trance, I move behind a naked man, facing his backside. I hear a noise. Lord, I hear a noise. Someone is coming to save me. My heart leaps in pride, and hope quickly subsides. Confusion as my mind starts to reel, overloaded by all the sensations I feel, as guilt shakes and crumbles, the foundation seal, the essence of youth dies as the world becomes real, and darkness consumes the light. Despite all my hardships, trauma, and violence, I stand before you today educated and self-aware, taught by better teachers, as a living testimony of hope. Yes, there is hope. I am committed to healing and stopping abuse. I am still here, and I ask you to come and join with me in making a pledge against violence. As it was said earlier, please visit the Stop Abuse Campaign website, stopabusecampaign.com, and please make a pledge to end violence today. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for sharing such honesty and strength. Next, we have Sheena Lachey. Sheena Lachey is a writer, artist, advocate, and YouTube blogger who expresses her authentic self through creativity, empowerment, sensuality, and spirituality. Sheena has written blogs, articles, plays, poetry, and short stories ever since the age of 7. She has 11 years of experience stage managing, directing, acting, and writing for theater and other performing arts. Sheena is motivated by her past and prospect of a limitless future. She's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and is an active advocate in the field. She was raised in a cult and lived to tell about it. Right now, she is on a journey to explore issues of sexuality and sensuality as it relates to spirit, nature, community, and the arts. Sheena lives in New York, writes for Vertical Art and Fitness Magazine and OwningPink.com, travels as much as she can, and is constantly looking for ways to create ritual and ceremony in her everyday life. Sheena.